You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 29th of May 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS.
Live from Hong Kong, this is The Globalist. I'm Tom Edwards. Coming up today, we're live at the UBS Asian Investment Conference at the Four Seasons. It's our second special edition of the programme. Legendary US political analyst Charlie Cook will be here a little later to tell us what he's worried about a few months out from the US general election and what the vote means for trade and for Asia. We'll catch up with some of the best and brightest from some of the most important cultural institutions here in Hong Kong, including the M+ Museum, Phillips Asia and Art Basel Hong Kong. We'll be reviewing the day's newspapers with Sissy Zhu from Nikkei a little later. And once again, we've got Monocle's own crew of editors on the ground. They've been following the conference closely, of course, but they've also been out and about. They'll tell us where they've been and what they were drinking a little later. That is all ahead on The Globalist, coming to you live from Hong Kong. And we're kicking off our second special edition of the show in, I must say, illustrious company, because James Chambers, Monocle's Asia editor, based in Bangkok, is here. Good afternoon, James.
Afternoon, Tom.
And also here, next to me, is Martin Yule, Head of APAC Research at UBS. Good afternoon, Martin.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
It's been a busy couple of days. Can I enter that as the understatement of the month contender?
Yeah, look, this is a stressful experience. I've got to be honest. A lot of people have put an enormous amount of work in. I have the pleasure of sort of jetting in from Sydney to see it all completely organised, a schedule given to me, and I'm told where to turn up and when.
And a very good job you've done too, Martin. But actually, let's take a step back and talk about this event happening now in Hong Kong. One of those designers of the programme, your colleague Neil, who's standing across the way, was telling us on this show yesterday about its importance strategically, but also the broader message. And this idea, I guess, that this kind of conference can only really happen, or should only really happen in Hong Kong. Tell me a bit about, I guess, why we're here.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, one of the things that our investing clients are seeking to do is to see thousands of companies every year. So obviously it's a lot more efficient for us to put on a conference like this and have, literally thousands of equity clients come in and see 300 companies at once, as opposed to, frankly, putting a lot of shoe leather to work and actually going out and seeing those companies. So there's an efficiency angle to it. The second thing is that the companies themselves want to meet new investors, and this is an avenue for them to broaden their relationships, and it's that melting pot, and things happen by osmosis when you put a lot of smart people together with ideas and capital, basically.
A lot of smart people, and I'm here as well. But it's funny, we were talking before we started the programme about a little bit of the serendipity of those meetings, and there's something I guess you can't design or know about that, but it is an amazing thing when you get all these people together in a room or in a grand hotel like this.
Yeah, no, live example was I did a panel yesterday on the brain, and this is sort of looking at brain-computer interfaces, but also some of the progression you've seen in GLP-1 drugs, etc. And just out of that, we had Amy Cruz, who I know you had on this program yesterday, but Amy is an investor, and she's an investor in that sort of leading-edge technology. And we had a vast array of clients come up to her after the session and press their business cards in her hand and say, "We'd love to hear more from you and see opportunities." So it's absolutely a forum where people are going to meet, see new ideas, see new thematics, and that's the key.
Well, and it's funny because, as you said, we spoke to Dr. Amy Cruz and Jordan Ewan yesterday on this show, and one of the clever devices, I think, of this conference in particular is this overlay of some quite specific micro themes looking at mental health and well-being and that interface with tech, as you described, and then the necessary macro coverage. And that's not they're not always easy bedfellows, but it seems to have hung together very elegantly. I don't know what you think.
Well, look, I think Neil's done a great job in curating the content, without doubt. I'd also say that our investors are looking for a number of things at these events. They're looking for the latest thinking of experts on the key questions that investors are facing. Who's going to win the US election? Charlie will tell us about that later. What's going to happen to inflation? What's going to be the ramifications of a potential change in government in the US for the APAC audience? Now, these types of big questions are obviously on their minds. We also want to find questions that aren't on their minds. In other words, what are going to be the investment themes that emerge over the next couple of years? And that's sessions like the one on the brain. It's also it's the thematics around cities, and I think we'll hear from Paul Romer soon, and he's an expert on that, and I'll leave that territory to him because otherwise it'd be a tad embarrassing. But the point being that we want to identify thematics that are going to affect the stock market in time. And if we're ahead of the curve there, we're providing a service to clients. They're going to make money from those thematics.
And Martin, I know one of the, you've been a busy man already, but you've got this panel which is to sort of summarise a little bit of the learnings from the piece, which is tricky to do while it's still kind of going on.
Yeah.
But let me ask you a little bit about, takeaways. You've talked about some of them already. What kinds of things might you be discussing when you look to try and summarise all of these different strands that have come together?
Yeah, well, Tom, the panel is a number of our most senior clients, CIOs of major investing institutions. So these people come to a conference like this with a lens of, okay, what direction is the market going to head from here? Am I confident about the earnings outlook for my companies? And at some level, what are other themes that are going to grip the audience over time? I'd say that there's a fairly clear consensus that right now, if the US election were to happen today, would probably be a Trump victory. I think there's an emerging consensus, frankly, that that might not be the worst thing in the world for APAC. Those outside the US tend to think that, I suppose I won't go too heavily into the politics here, Tom, but suffice it to say that I think the rest of the world sort of looks at the US with a bit of an eyebrow raised. But the conclusion, I think, of the conference is that there are a lot of Trump-like policies which actually won't be that bad for APAC. So that's a tick. China is a big swing factor. The Chinese market's about half the level it was at the peak of 2021, as recently as that. It's had a nice rally. Can it move another 15 or 20% up? Well, given how far it's fallen, probably, right? So people are looking for incremental data points on earnings out of Chinese companies and what those companies are saying about the consumer in China, more specifically. So, we'd like to think that this conference has been timely because there's some uncertainty out there, quite a lot of uncertainty, probably more uncertainty than investors are typically comfortable with. But the views of 300 companies reporting back live from being on the ground in China gives us the opportunity to sort of really see what bubbles up from the bottom. And I expect our panel will be saying that they're seeing some tentative signs of optimism, which is great.
Martin, signs of optimism is the business that Monocle's in, so I'm glad you've illuminated some of those for us. Great to get your insights. Best of luck dragging yourself to the finish line, Martin. Martin, you're great to have you on the programme. Thanks for being with us. Martin's done a very elegant job there at setting up my next guest. We are joined by the Nobel Prize-winning economist and former chief economist of the World Bank, Paul Romer. Good afternoon, Paul.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
How's Hong Kong treating you?
Oh, very well. So a lot of ideas flying around in the conference here, so that's fun.
It's very dynamic.
Yeah.
Now, Paul, you were on a panel, I think you've done a couple of panels, but one was entitled Past, Present and Future Places of Progress, a session moderated by our friend Neil standing over there. The future of cities is a real Monocle staple, and I guess you were getting into the weeds of how we ensure tomorrow's cities grow, how they flourish, how they support human progress, and this is so much of your work is about that. I don't know, were you reassured by the tone of the discussion?
Well, Well, let me see if I can do my economist thing and turn cities into something that's boring, and off-putting. If you think of the demand for floor space in cities, it's going to be proportional to urban income. If you think about the rule about you spend a certain fraction of your income on your mortgage, just scale that up. So urban income will grow, partly because more people will move into urban areas, also because the people who are there will benefit from growth in GDP per capita or output per capita. So if you look around the world, total urban income, hence total desired spending on urban real estate, is going to grow by 2%, 3%, 4% per year for kind of the indefinite future. The problem we're facing is that cities aren't and have great difficulty increasing their floor space by 2%, 3%, 4% per year. It doesn't sound like much, but it's actually quite a lot. And you project it forward over many years, it's very hard to sustain. So what then results is this collision between more demand and limited supply, and it shows up in higher prices instead of more square feet. So at a very broad level, I've been pushing this notion that you can try and increase floor space in existing cities, but the growth is so fast, we should really be thinking about starting entirely new cities. And as you probably know, I've been on about this for, a decade, and, nobody's listening, and it seems like kind of a joke. And a few, crazy people that I wouldn't want to be associated with have taken up the idea. So it's the supporters have actually
It's getting.
The supporters of the idea have actually been more problematic than the opponents. But I think we really, at some point, will have to think about this again. And of course, Hong Kong is the right place to have this conversation because, Hong Kong was the case where, in effect, without necessarily thinking it through, the British said, hey, let's just start a new city here. It's just a little fishing port. What the heck, And it was an amazingly powerful thing to have done. Shenzhen, just across the way, was another more recent, hey, let's just start a new city here. So I think if we take these examples seriously, and line it up with Dubai too, which kind of went through a very rapid transformation. We should get more governments thinking about how to get serious about not just increasing the supply of floor space in existing cities, but build some new ones. So now, was that boring enough? Or
no, you felt Paul. It was wry and well informed. Let me just ask you about, though, and I sort of alluded to this in my first question about optimism, because I don't know if you've said this before, but that you used to consider yourself an optimistic economist. Is this?
I was the most optimistic economist I knew.
But let me ask you about the was. Where are you at now? And is it to do with the misapplication of the potential of technology, which I think it's safe to say you were more optimistic about? Where's on the Roma-ometer of optimism? Where are we currently?
Well, look, I was pointing ahead to Moore's Law. This is back in the 1980s, and saying, look, this is going to be like gangbusters. We're going to have all kinds of new things we can do, and this will be hugely beneficial. We haven't seen the same kind of broad-based benefits that we should have had, that I anticipated. There have been some very concentrated gains, but a lot of people in a lot of developed countries feel like they've just been completely left behind. And so I think we have to think about, well, what is it going to take beyond just more technology? We could speed up research and development, speed up discovery of new ideas, but it's going to take some other things to make sure that most people feel like they have some hope for the future. The increasing challenge of being priced out of urban real estate, where urban opportunity is the gateway to urban opportunity is urban real estate. This is one of the things that I think is really weighing on young people, and I think it's one of the things that's leaving too many people in these kind of declining rural areas, at least in the United States. But I think we have to look a little bit more broadly about how do we make sure that everybody has access to opportunity. But boy, more urban real estate, more opportunity. Just going back to the kind of mobility we used to have in the United States. People could move if things were depressed in one area. Because of restrictions on building and the price of housing, workers are not nearly as mobile as they used to be.
Well, I just wonder, do we risk omitting a kind of adequate discourse about some of these are social elements, aren't they? We talk about tech, with the fixation with the tech revolution.
Yeah.
Again, I know you've spoken before about, listen, don't worry about that. Worry about the revolution.
Yeah.
But is there a failure in some quarters to integrate the socio-economic parts of the calculation?
Yeah, I think a lot of economists wouldn't have denied that there were very important issues about what really leads to a satisfying life and children who aren't depressed. Nobody would have denied those were important issues, but they would have said, well, it'll just take care of itself. If we just have economic growth and new technology, it'll all take care of itself. That was a little bit my position. Now I think we have to be a little bit more actively engaged. I think, for example, that allowing the targeted digital advertising model to undergird so much of digital services has been a huge mistake. I think we just need to go back to the kind of model that we think of in a market where if you want something, you pay for it and you get something in exchange. So I'm on the record, I want to tax digital advertising out of existence. I think it's just a horrible model. So, if you want search, Google search, or, indexing, search for the internet, you just pay for it. There's nothing wrong with markets where people pay for things.
Why do you make such an elegantly straightforward idea? Well, you make it sound elegantly straightforward.
Well, could
that really happen?
Why is that controversial? Well, look, these companies make more money with the digital advertising model than they would make if they sold services. And they've looked at this, they know. So, and they're very powerful, they're very influential in, media and PR and so forth. But I think at some point, the public, the voters should say, look, this is our country. We get to decide. We want markets where, we don't want to, when I go search for what's the phone number for the Marriott at the San Francisco airport, a bunch of people are bribing Google to give me a bunch of other answers and not tell me what's the Marriott at San Francisco airport. So let's just go back to one where, I get what I want because I'm paying for it. So I think there's some hope, but it will take a while. I think the advertising model's been horrible, toxic. I think anonymity has also been a real problem, and we should really make it, without requiring anything, just make it possible for somebody like me to prove what's really me as opposed to what's somebody who's pretending to be me. And I have those, So I'm very big on this technology of digital signatures, that soon I'll be able to put a digital signature on any email, any paper, anything I write, and just tell people, if it doesn't have my digital signature on it, don't believe it. By the way, any video, audio, all of it is going to be susceptible to being fake.
I should say to our audience, this is the real.
Yeah, right.
He's standing right next to me.
Yeah, but just how do we know who's saying that?
Well, exactly. This is a fair point. Yeah. And just on that point, Paul, and I don't want to sort of get into the weeds of the AI debate.
Oh, I love getting into the weeds.
You're very eloquent about. But you're still positive, is it fair to say, about its potential, not to reshape that narrative, that landscape you just described, which is prone to imitation and misinformation and all the rest of it. Do we just need to be glass half full about the AI potential?
I think if we solved some of these structural problems, like if we stopped using digital advertising, which has all kinds of perverse side effects, went back to just paid services, and if we started making it possible for us to do digitally what we do in real life, which is that you don't interact with people who won't tell you who they are. It's too sketchy. If we could fix those problems, then something like machine learning would be steered in a different direction and arguably much more beneficial. But in a context where you've got these forces that are kind of sort of steering it in a potentially harmful direction, you're eventually going to see people who say, we want to stop progress, we want to stop learning, and that's not the right answer. What you want to do is guide it in the right direction where it's socially beneficial, but still keep learning.
Paul, you're a man that speaks eminent good sense. Have you heard that before? It's probably not the first time, surely, but it's been.
But I try so hard to be provocative. You're ruining my whole thing. So, Paul, you're provoking me by not.
A gentle nudge.
Acknowledging that I'm provocative.
Paul, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much for taking the
Wonderful.
time. Thanks very much, Paul.
Let's do it again.
That was Paul Romer joining us here on The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
You are listening to The Globalist here on Monocle Radio. We're going to review some newspapers now, aren't we? James Chambers is still alongside me. Are you ready?
I'm still here.
He's still here. And joining us in our pop-up studio is Sissy Zhou from Nikkei. Sissy's the senior business correspondent. Good afternoon, Sissy.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Well, no, thanks for stopping by. And I gather you've got some stories that have caught your eye. I don't know. Where should we start? Give us an idea of what you've been watching out for.
Sure. I will start with my former employer, South China Morning Post. So there's a story about JD billionaire founder Richard Liu blasting his underperforming employees in the business section of SCMP's print version and today. So the story is about Richard Liu, the high-profile founder of Chinese online retailer platform JD.com, said in a viral video recently that the company is no place for unproductive staff, and he also threatened to lay off them if they don't work hard enough. So the video went viral because Richard Liu was born in a very poor family, and his management style is pretty down to earth. That is quite different from other high-profile entrepreneurs such as Jack Ma, And he always calls his employees his brothers. And it's also funny that, in 2018, he said JD will never fire any brothers. And now he's saying those who have bad performances or those who never work hard, you are not my brothers. And but at the same time, JD is also aggressively raising some of the staff's salary. So this carrot and stick approach, as SCMP calls it, reflects Richard Liu's anxiety over how to maintain growth in such a fierce competition environment in China's e-commerce sector.
Carrot or stick? What works for James Chambers, I wonder? A bit of both, maybe?
Well, it's quite interesting how a lot of the coverage of China that we see in the West is that all the young Chinese don't want to work, and there's this whole lying flat phenomenon. They're quitting their jobs and they don't want to do anything. But actually, there's a lot of people doing a lot of hard work in China, and this whole 996 thing became very famous, working from 9 till 9, 6 days a week. I was just speaking to Sissy earlier, and apparently now it's 11-6. Which is, I don't know how that works. I don't know what, they've changed hours and they start a bit later, but they work later. Anyway, it's suggesting that actually they're working even harder. And there's a lot of focus in the tech industry about just how hard this is. We had a recent story about a lady from Baidu getting into trouble for basically shouting at her juniors. So it's definitely a hot topic in China. It's not fair to say that everybody up there is basically sitting at home and twiddling their thumbs.
Excellent. Yeah. Carrot or stick? What would you say, Sissy, for you?
Okay, maybe just let me add something about the 11-11-6 because that sounds really horrible. So the 9-9-6, which means you start work from 9 a.m., then you finish work at 9 p.m., then you work for 6 days a week. So that was quite prevalent in the Chinese tech industry previously. But in the past few years, I think because of the increasing pressure from the authority and also plus the slow growth of the Chinese tech sector, and then some companies started to reduce the working hours of staff. But then particularly in e-commerce sector, the fear is getting fierce and fierce, and then the companies now start to realize, they have to have this mindset of being a startup, which means they are following every practices of Pinduoduo, which is currently a formidable competitor to JD and Alibaba. So the 11-11-6 is a working scheme that implemented by Pinduoduo. So you start from 11 and then you finish at 11 p.m. Then you work 6 days a week. But some, as you mentioned, that some of the young people, they prefer to lay flat, and then they are really resistant to this notorious working culture. But some young people, they can just accept that, because if you work longer, it means you get higher pay.
Interesting stuff. Shall we move on?
Yes.
What else have you got for us? Tell us where you look next.
Okay, so the next story is from Nikkei. I'm sorry. So it's very interesting interview by my colleagues Annie and Lolly from Taipei. So it's about the semiconductor. So it's not very new story. I think the interview is very interesting because it provides a very kind of anecdote perspective to the very mysterious semiconductor sector. So Annie and Lolly, my colleagues, so they interviewed a former executive at TSMC. As you know, it's the world's largest chip maker. And the interviewee is called Conrad Yang. He is currently a professor of advanced technology at the National Taiwan University. And he also consulted companies including, Intel and SMIC. So he's very experienced in the semiconductor industry. And, he had this very interesting theory that Asia's Confucian culture is a perfect fit for modern chip making. And because, the West may need a lot of time and efforts to catch up due to the completely different mindsets. And the rationale behind his theory is that the procedure of manufacturing a chip it involves more than 1,500 steps, and you need precision in every step. Of course, in the he means in the semiconductor sector, innovation is very important, but you cannot be innovative in every step. So he means in some of the steps you have to strictly follow the procedure. Also, on the one hand, you have to be professionally trained, and at the same time, you have to learn how to obey at the appropriate time. So his conclusion is that countries, particularly in East Asia, such as South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, they are ideal destinations for manufacturing chips.
James, a Confucian approach. What do you make of that to chip making?
Well, it makes me think about the factories, the semiconductor fabs that TSMC are meant to be building in the US. This was hit the news. This is a big story when they announced them. But, Sissy, do we know where things stand? Have those factories or fabs actually come into being? Have they managed to find enough American talent to make these?
That's a very, very good question. So first, unfortunately, I have to tell you that first of all, TSMC has already got subsidies from the U.S. government to build its third mega factory in Arizona. But previously, they had two mega factories that were already under construction. But both of the operations of the previous two factories had been delayed, mainly because of a talent shortage, as you mentioned. And the two, and one of the factories in Arizona has already started trial production, and then they have already encountered a lot of problems, particularly the management style. Because in the semiconductor sector, you have to, work like a really Asian tech worker, which means you have to be on call 24/7, and you have to work for 6 days a week, and maybe more than 12 hours. So how come that kind of work culture is acceptable in the US? I don't think so.
Sissy, it's been fab. Thanks for picking out a couple of great stories. We're going to leave it there because I just want to quickly hear from Charlie Cook. We mentioned earlier in the programme that we were going to hear from Charlie, and he's the political analyst, of course, the founder of the Cook Political Report, and he was on a panel here about the US election and its implication for trade and Asia. Martin was talking about this a bit earlier. We tracked Charlie down, and with typical panache, he gave me a couple of headlines on the state of play and the state of the nation as well ahead of November's general election in the US. Let's take a listen.
These people that I'm talking about, swing voters, they're trying to make it from one month to another. They're not thinking about democracy. They're thinking about paying rent, making a mortgage payment, kid not drop out of school, or daughter not get pregnant, or whatever. Their worldview is pretty much focused on that. And I personally, I'm very patriotic, and my wife has always called me a pathological optimist. But even I am worried about where the political process in the United States is coming undone. And this is somebody where I've been, involved in politics for 52 years now. And I worry. But the thing about it is the people that worry the most about the future of democracy are people who are not undecided. They know what they're doing. And also, you can also see people that are Trump voters that worry about the future of democracy. But the question then is, what's the threat? And to them, the threat might be voter or election fraud, and non-citizens voting. Now, I will tell you, as somebody who's watched politics for a long time, there's virtually no voter fraud. I mean, we do a lot of things badly in the United States, but that's not one. But politicians use, let me throw one to bash on Democrats. Just as voter fraud is really not a problem, vote suppression isn't a problem. That there, lots of studies, it's easier to vote now than it's ever been. And there very few voters have to walk on broken glass and then over hot coals to vote. And it's a lot easier now than it was before the pandemic. So both sides use these things to kind of stir the pot up and to keep their people really motivated, and that the other side is wrong and they're evil, and there's nothing they will not stoop to gain or hold on to power. And that's the view in each party about the opposite party.
Well, it's interesting, and I didn't want to kind of go down that sort of AI, rabbit hole and this idea of a fracturing media and people being exploited by disinformation and misinformation. But in the context of the job you do and looking at polling, for example, presumably the huge amount of data available makes your job easier, but all of these other forces, as malign or benign as they may be, make it more difficult. How do you take the temperature in terms of how easy or difficult it is to actually do the job you're trying to do?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's easier, with the internet, and when, you see these major polls come out from networks or whatever, there's some that I can just pull down off the internet 2,000 pages of crosstabs of every imaginable demographic. And in the old days, nobody had access to that much data. So in that sense, it's great. But in terms of AI, for the record, you're asking a 70-year-old guy about AI, okay? So all I worry about is the political consequences. Other people can worry about the other aspects of it. But for me, I worry about two groups. They're a group of people that are so gullible, left or right. They're so gullible, they'll believe damn near anything. And they could be manipulated to the nth degree through AI, okay? There's another group that already don't believe anything that anybody says. And it's another excuse to ignore, even from what I would think would be fairly authoritative sources. They don't believe anything. And so it just sort of takes pre-existing problems and makes it a lot worse.
The brilliant Charlie Cook there, talking to us earlier. You're listening to The Globalist, a special live edition coming from Hong Kong. Right now, though, we're going to cross back to Midori House in London and hear from Vincent McAviney, who's standing by with some of the other stories we're watching today. Vinny?
Thank you, Tom. A spokesperson for the White House has said the administration does not believe Israel has crossed its red line by launching a full-scale invasion of Rafah in southern Gaza. Israeli forces have now reached the centre of the city, further displacing Palestinians. President Biden had said he would limit weapons supplies to Israel if they entered the population centres, where hundreds of thousands of civilians are sheltering. A union representing more than a fifth of workers at Samsung Electronics has called the first strike at the South Korean technology giant since it was founded in 1969. Management has been in talks with the union since the start of the year over wages, but the two sides have so far failed to strike a deal. If one can't be reached, workers at the world's biggest smartphone, TV and microchip company will walk out on the 7th of June. And lawyers in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial have made their closing arguments in New York. The former president's team attacked Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer and the prosecution's star witness, as the greatest liar of all time. Prosecutors rebutted that, portraying Cohen as a flawed tour guide to a mountain of evidence. The 12-person jury will now have to decide whether the Republican presidential nominee's payment to porn actress Stormy Daniels in 2016 means Trump is guilty beyond reasonable doubt of falsifying business records. Back to you in Hong Kong, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Vinny. More headlines from Vinny later in the day here on Monocle Radio. I've been joined here at our radio booth by Monocle's design editor, Nick Monisse, fresh from the stage, in fact, Nick.
Straight off the stage.
But we're not here to pick your brain about that. We might do later. I want you to set up our next little audio nugget we've got for our lucky listeners, because you met a load of really interesting people yesterday. Tell me more about this next one.
So this is Shirley Surya from M+. I'm actually heading there this afternoon. So I did this interview without actually going to the museum, but I was so excited, so eager to get a little bit of insight before I head there. But essentially, they're a museum dedicated to visual art, but also architecture, furniture, design. And I think that's what kind of appealed to me. I think typically those disciplines are underrepresented in terms of museum curation. So I wanted to find a little bit more about that, why they set out to, I guess, start to document design architecture across Asia. And Shirley's going to explain that to us now.
In short, it was a paper. It was a white paper conceived by the government of Hong Kong at that point, a rather enlightened way. They don't want to have a museum, another museum. So M+ stands for Museum and More. And it was pretty much embedded with the idea that Hong Kong produces more than just visual art. There is moving image, there's film, there's architecture and design, there's popular culture. What is a museum that could represent this? So therefore, the word visual culture framework is very key for M+. So that is a museum for visual culture.
And how does design and architecture fit within that? That's my next question.
So that's a framework. But then, of course, if you want to look at the history of disciplines, the visual art discipline within museologically, like the idea of collecting it and all that, it's already in place. Like many museums have those models. Same goes for design and architecture. It's also a discipline. Whether it's a teaching discipline, a professional discipline, or a collecting discipline. Then the third discipline is moving image. Same thing. It's actually, MoMA has the same sort of emphasis, 3 teams, but they are more like departments, whereas for us, we're not really departments. We are still talking to each other and it's rather porous in our kind of like exchanges. But that's how DNA, I guess I put it as short, comes in. Because it is reflecting on what is happening here, what is being produced in Hong Kong, and so it should also be reflected in what the museum collects, research and displays.
Tell us a little bit about that research and collection. You mentioned that it's the only kind of museum or organisation in Asia really dedicated to this. The scope doesn't just stop at Hong Kong architecture and design, it's much broader than that.
Yeah, so also in the paper it mentioned about geography. So geography here is almost like we're not a Hong Kong museum. We are looking at the world through a Hong Kong perspective, but we're also looking at Hong Kong from a global lens. So that sort of exchange, the idea of a more like internodal perspective is a very important one for our curatorial team. And so, of course, Asia is our core as a region, but then the framework, the approach will always be transnational. So we cannot deny that this is a port city from a long, long time ago, and that exchange has to be part of how we even decide what we collect and how we tell the story. It's always that exchange. So that's why it's the region, I guess, in that sense.
And tell us a little bit about what you're collecting and what you're focusing on.
Yeah, so I think in the beginning, you can say, again, just to credit as well, our founding lead curators, Eric Chen, and at that point, we really wanted to set the vision that we are going to go multidisciplinary within design. So everything from digital to furniture to architecture to graphic. Of course, some discipline like architecture is a big one. It's a heavy one. When you say you want to collect architecture, you better not trifle with it. You got to go like hardcore. But the other ones like furniture or graphic, we don't need to go hardcore, but we need to address it. So in some ways, it's not like a system. Like, okay, gotta go A to Z, like this is this much and that much, it's not like that. It's also about intuition. It's also about serendipity. I always use that word when it comes to collecting. But there's also some core purpose and focus. And we knew from day one, we have to build or reconstruct or construct the histories of architecture and design in the region. So if you were to be a student of architecture in Oxford or AA or wherever that is, your superstars in your textbooks will be the Mies. Maybe the Kenzo Tange in Japan. Nothing from Cambodia, nothing from Thailand, nothing from China. Maybe one guy, So I think for us, it's important that we actually have to represent these players that were important to the city, to the region, and ideally, if possible, acquire their archives or even reproduce models to do with their projects. And of course, we started off with Hong Kong and mainland China first, and then later on, we actually go towards and it's not so much encyclopedic here. So when we go to Cambodia, for example, we will get Van Mollevan's project. When we go to Malaysia, we know that there's one practice that's a very important colonial practice, so we'll go there. So it's that sort of like targeted based on certain narrative. And of course, post-war, post-colonial nation building, this is in 2012. This is before all the other museums in UK is like, let's go decolonize, you know. For us, it's not about decolonize or not. It's more of like, this is what happened here and no one is documenting it. No one is collecting it. And so we go there.
You're talking about, I guess, expanding the architectural canon. Like, I think there's a very narrow Western lens. I mean, how can this help? Let's say I'm that architecture student at the AA. How can expanding this canon help you or help me as a student?
I think it's just more about criteria of what is of value. So we can't just say anything with a flat roof or a Miesian box is the way, right? It could be a hip roof. It could be completely to do with like Sri Lankan Kandyan roof. And then you don't make judgment just based on the form. You get to understand why is that form an important one for the architects in Sri Lanka at a particular point of time. How do they actually extract that form and make it a form of national identity being expressed? You know, so I think that understanding needs to be there. It's no longer just about judging a kind of like aesthetic, preferred style or like preferences. We need to know why certain forms exist in other places, in other regions for other reasons. And it's these reasons and motivations that need to be informed, that we need to be informed by. And the same goes for today. You're not going to be designing only for particular kinds of audience, but multiple. And this is the idea. Like, you need to understand that the idea of values are diverse. You know, what you think is important in UK is not what you think is important in Africa, perhaps, right? So that sort of diversity is really more about that. I think everyone, whether you're a creator, whether you're a student, whether you're a practitioner, this is a framework that you need to embrace. So I think it enriches your work, it opens up new perspectives, and you don't just kind of go with it like an elitist sort of way, like, oh, it's personal taste and that's it. That's not sufficient to build something that really is able to impact people.
Shirley Surya there in conversation with Monocle's Nick Monisse. You're listening to Monocle Radio. It is exactly 14:42 here in Hong Kong, 8:42 if you're listening in Zurich. Well, we're hearing about M+ a moment ago, and we've got some more cultural sustenance for you next on the programme. James and I are very fortunate to be joined by Jonathan Crockett, head of Phillips Asia, and Angelle Siyang-Le, Art Basel Hong Kong director. Welcome both. Spring auction week is relaxing as ever, Jonathan? Well, you look very calm and cool and collected.
Well, as an auctioneer, it's my job to remain cool and collected, even in the most stressful of situations. But so I'm used to this. But yeah, absolutely, a very busy week. We've got our marquee modern contemporary art sales coming up on Friday evening and on Saturday, and we've just had our watches sales earlier in the week. So busy time indeed.
Hong Kong is many things to the region: finance hub, wine hub, but also it's the biggest art market. I mean, with these spring auctions, what does that mean for Hong Kong? Are collectors flying in from all over Asia to actually be in the room, or are they mostly taking part remotely or sending their people?
Well, if you'd asked me that question 5 years ago, pre-COVID pandemic, then I'd have had a different answer to what I'll give you today. But over the pandemic, people have got used to operating online, whether it's on their phone or leaving absentee bids or bidding literally on their computer or iPad. An element of that's remained true today with the way people operate and how they participate in our sales. Everyone seems to be very busy post-pandemic and catching up with, for lost time, whether it's travelling around the world or they're just used to the convenience of being at home and bidding in an auction. No doubt for the evening sales, people do like to turn up because they do like to see who else is bidding in the room. But still, the numbers are a lot more reduced than they were previously. But yeah, we'll see what happens on Friday and on Saturday. But numbers are definitely lower than they were before. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, and Angelle, I'll jump in here because, of course, I guess the equivalent crazy busy time for you is in late March, of course, and we can look back and see what were the dynamics. Tell us a little bit. I always wonder how directly, the mainland economy, for example, is it almost palpable, the different appetites amongst certainly mainland collectors? Can you reflect on March and really see where the needle was shifting there?
Yes, of course. March felt like a long time ago now, since a lot happened after March, in April and in May with all the auctions. Art fairs are slightly different than auctions, obviously. So the audience who kind of came to the shows, they kind of came to Hong Kong to really experience, what's really happening in the city, in the region. Those who haven't really been back in the region for a while, they also wanted to kind of reconnect with their friends and the galleries, the artists in this side of the world. So for us, we definitely have seen a more international crowd in Hong Kong in March, especially those who haven't really been back for like 4 to 5 years. The mainland Chinese, either buyers, collectors, art professionals, or simply art lovers, they have always been one of the strongest group of visitors coming to that week of March. And Hong Kong itself is a very strong domestic market. So Hong Kong and mainland China basically form the highest attendance of VIPs and visitors for our Hong Kong show. What is interesting for us is that Johnny and I were just talking about it right before this, that we saw a lot of newer faces, younger, especially the younger audience, turning up for the very first time. A lot of them, we actually don't have so much information about them, but they paid close attention to the art market, the new artists, the gallery programs, and what is really happening in Hong Kong. So these people kind of like surface now for the very first time after the pandemic. It's sophisticated. They're kind of like learning before they buy, a lot of observations, homework being done before they attend the fair. So yeah, this is what was happening in March.
And Jonathan, your evening sale is coming up in a few days. I see your big lots, Jean-Michel Basquiat, you've got Banksy, as Gerhard Richter. I mean, they're all kind of Western artists. If we talk about what bidders and collectors want to buy in Asia, is it still big name Western artists?
It's a good question. You're right. We do have a Jean-Michel Basquiat painting from 1982 is the leading lot of our auction on Friday, at its estimate of 90 million to 120 million Hong Kong dollars. It's actually it could potentially be the highest priced lot of any lot at an auction that's offered this season here in Hong Kong across all the different auction houses. So we're quite excited to see how that goes. And we have a fantastic work by Gerhard Richter and a great example of work by Banksy too. You're right, but yeah, they're Western names. And what we've seen over the last 10 years, especially since Basel showed up on our doorstep here, is that collectors in Asia have been paying closer attention to work produced by artists from around the world, not just here in Asia. And to an extent, that's been to, I would say, the detriment of a lot of collectors, a lot of artists here in Asia, whose work has perhaps been overlooked in favour of Western artists. But I do see a newer trend, or a recent trend, where people are beginning to rediscover art from Asia. And so we're seeing more collectors from the region here starting to pay closer attention to the art that's produced here in China, across the region. And
Angelle, would you agree from what you saw at Basel?
Yes, actually, I have to agree. One of the phenomenon that we observed from this March fair was that galleries, especially the galleries from this region, started to bring a lot of the historical materials to an international fair like Art Basel. We felt that in some way the galleries are trying to kind of like reshape its own art history from this side of the world, especially the contemporary art history. And a lot of the younger generations, they're not only sophisticated with Western kind of well-known names, but they are also paying a lot more attention to what is coming out of this region. Yeah, absolutely, I would agree with what Johnny's.
Can I ask you a sort of brick and mortar question, Jonathan? Because I know you spoke with James, I think last year, maybe in sort of new premises, and there are some interesting shifts. A lot of the big houses are kind of taking on their own spaces to hold the auctions, which is of course a bit of a pivot. What difference does that make? Obviously now you're a year and change into that process. Others are kind of following suit. Does that change the dynamics of sort of physically how auctions operate?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if anything, it signals the maturing of the market here, in a sense, because up until now, or up until we opened our Asia headquarters in West Kowloon on the doorstep of M+ last spring, auctions have, for the last 30, 40 plus years, been held in temporary pop-up locations, whether it's a hotel ballroom or in the convention centre here in Hong Kong. And so by having permanent spaces, Sotheby's Christie's will be opening their spaces later in the year too, really it'll enable us to have across all houses, year-round activation of our spaces, as opposed to just having something that pops up in the spring for 10 days and something in the fall for 10 days. And that opens up all sorts of possibilities. It means that we can introduce new categories and just activate the local collector base here throughout the year, as opposed to just on a seasonal basis.
You mentioned categories, and we always seem to get drawn into conversations about art. I mean, that seems to be the main focus, but obviously you have other lots, whether it's a lot of jewelry. And right now, there's a lot of stories about people, especially in China, buying gold, buying jewelry. I mean, how does that translate to your sales? Are you seeing a lot more activity and a lot more bidding for those categories?
I mean, we operate, what distinguishes us from other houses is that we operate only in 6 core collecting categories. They're art, watches, and jewelry. Art can be broken down into fine art, photos, editions.
We've put him on the spot.
Something else. Yeah. Designed. I forgot design. There we go. And so, whereas before we were perhaps grouping everything all together in one sale when it came to the art, now we'll be able to spread things across different sales. We're having our first sale of editions, photos and design next month in June here. Yeah, you're right. When it comes to watches, jewellery, what we see is that perhaps a lot of the people who are coming into money now and who are able to collect for the first time perhaps start off collecting jewellery and then go into watches, and after that it's almost like graduating into collecting art. So by offering different categories as an auction house, it really helps to pull people in and to convert them into collectors, and of course Basel benefits from that.
Well, I just wanted to very, very quickly ask you, Angelle, Basel. Next month, we're not in June yet, are we? I presume. Do you head over to the home event? Very, very quickly, what are you excited about seeing? People to meet? What's the dynamics that get you excited about heading to Basel?
Basel is definitely one of the most exciting shows that everybody in the art world, looking forward to. It is our mother fair, even though Hong Kong is my favorite, but Basel is something that you really go there to see what is the top quality works that the galleries have been saving, for the entire year to really showcase it there. We have, almost 300 galleries, 284, I think, and then we have this 70 large-scale installations in the unlimited sector, which is one of the most popular sector. One of the things that I look for the most. This is also the one year we have 5 more Asian galleries presenting in the Basel Fair. Very exciting for us, a few from mainland China, Taiwan, from Japan. And I was just telling Johnny, one of the things that I always look forward to the most, which I'm taking Johnny with me, is rice swimming. In Basel, which we host for our VIPs and our exhibitors on the Monday before the show opens.
Very exciting. Well, thanks for shedding some light on the market here and your thoughts on the bigger picture. Forgive the pun. Jonathan, Crockett, Angelle, thanks both for joining us here on The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Thanks guys. Time is a little short, so we're going to just wrap up the show. We'll be back with final insights from some more of the Monocle team here on the ground in just a moment.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
We are to wrap things up at the end of this second special edition of The Globalist. I've been rejoined by some of my colleagues. James Chambers, of course, still here. Naomi Xu-Elegant and Nick Monisse.
You can't seem to shake me off.
They sprinted into position. The clock is against us, team. But I just wanted to get a quick final reflection. Nick, I'll come to you first of all. Basking in the glory of your on-stage appearance alongside Tyler a little earlier. Give me in 60 seconds or fewer, I don't know, a reflection, a thought, learning, if you will.
I mean, firstly, I would like to say that I was outstanding, so I just want that noted. I think we had this panel. We just sort of talked for 45 minutes about benchmarks, brilliant things we've seen across the globe. But what was really brilliant was when we threw it back out to the crowd and some of the discussion that came off the back of that. And, you know, we have our own quality of life survey, a host of other people, a host of other publications and analysts have their surveys as well. But we kind of discussed those cities that maybe slipped through the cracks. And I think it's time that we start to maybe look beyond, you know, our big global capitals and really start to think about the smaller places that might be a lovely spot to call home.
Oh, exciting. I wonder where that will take us next. Naomi, you've probably got 30 seconds. A takeaway from that? I know you were at Vinexpo yesterday and you're excited about Kyrgyz wine. You mentioned that to me earlier. But give me a quick thought on what you'll take away from this trip to Hong Kong.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we can give investment advice, probably not, right? But buy Chinese wine is my main takeaway. I think there's a bright future ahead for it. Prices are soaring.
Right, that's very sage. I'm just hearing we definitely can't do that, but it's fine. But very sage advice and tasty as well. James Chambers, my co-pilot on a couple of these shows. The floor is yours. Back in your erstwhile home, it's been 18 months or so since you moved on. Give me a Chambers reflection before you head back to Bangkok.
I lived here for almost a decade. I thought when Naomi and I were here during COVID and trapped here, we basically dug up every single story and found every interesting person you could possibly profile. But actually, every time I come back, I just find new layers, new entrepreneurs, new businesses. On Monday, I went to interview these two ladies who founded this amazing knitwear company. They buy their wool from a Scottish mill. It comes from Aussie sheep via China. And they're creating these really interesting patterns that are being super successful in Japan and America. And I never knew they existed. And their office is in this industrial building in East Kowloon. And that's just classic Hong Kong.
Keep your ears peeled, listeners. You may be hearing more about that story from James in due course on Monocle Radio. But that is, I'm afraid to say, all we have time for in this special edition of The Globalist, coming to you live from Hong Kong. Thanks to our team back in London, Vincent and Laura, and our studio manager, Tamsin Howard. Thanks here to David Stevens for manning the radio desk. After the headlines from Vinny, more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Do listen out for more special broadcasts coming your way from the UBS Asian Investment Conference here in Hong Kong. I'm Tom Edwards. Thanks for listening.